The room fell silent the moment Donald Trump leaned back in his chair, smirking like a man who believed he owned the world. Cameras were rolling, advisors were watching, and the American press was waiting for another one of his dramatic soundbites. He didn't disappoint. With a dismissive wave of his hand, he said loud enough for every microphone to catch, "Africa, what a joke." Laughter bubbled among his staffers. Forced, nervous, the kind of laugh people give when they know the king wants applause. But this time, the king had miscalculated. Because sitting across from him, dressed simply, calmly, with the unshakable stillness of a soldier who had seen war and survived it, was Captain Ibrahim Traoré. His eyes didn't move. They didn't blink. They cut straight through the room like a blade that had waited centuries for its moment. The cameras turned toward him. Even Trump noticed the shift. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't show anger. Instead, he leaned forward, planting his forearms on the table as if establishing new ground, African ground, right there in Washington. He said, slowly, deliberately, "Mock us again. But this time, do it without those men with guns around you." The room froze. Trump's smile shattered first, the corners of his mouth dropping as if the floor had been pulled out from under him. His hand twitched toward his security team, as if to reassure himself they were still there. Reporters exchanged stunned glances. For once, no one dared laugh. Traoré continued, his voice steady as iron. "You mock Africa because you fear a future you can't control. And that future is already here." It was the kind of moment that didn't just go viral, it reshaped narratives, humiliated egos, and echoed far beyond the four walls it happened in. The footage would be replayed worldwide within hours. But in that room, in that breath, everyone understood one truth. Trump had started a game he was not prepared to finish. Traoré had just shown him, and the world, why mocking Africa was the last mistake anyone should be making. The studio lights burned hot, but not as hot as the arrogance dripping from Donald Trump's voice. Cameras rolled, advisors froze, and every staffer in the room knew the former president was about to cross a line he couldn't walk back from. Trump leaned forward, smirking with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no, and barked loud enough for every microphone to catch it, "Africa? Weak. Poor. Broken. They should thank us for everything they have." A couple of aides forced smiles. One coughed nervously. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't blink. He didn't tense. He didn't shift. His posture stayed calm, soldier calm, like a man who had walked through real war, not Twitter battles and staged rallies. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence that followed Trump's rant felt heavy, almost physical, as if the air itself waited to see what Traoré would do. The young Burkinabe leader rested his gloves on the table, leaned just slightly forward, and spoke in a tone so steady it cut sharper than a shout. "You mock Africa," he said, his eyes never leaving Trump's. "Yet Africa never begged you, never bowed to you, and never needed you." Trump opened his mouth to interrupt, but Traoré kept going, calm, precise, lethal. "You speak like a man who has never stepped outside his bubble. But the world has changed. Africa has changed. And the next time you say those words," he pointed subtly at the cameras, "say them without hiding behind security and microphones." A ripple swept across the room. Trump's jaw tightened. His advisors panicked. Someone reached for the audio controls. But it was too late. The moment was captured, crystal clear, unedited, undeniable. Traoré leaned back, expression unreadable, and said one final line that made Trump's smirk vanish completely. "Mock us again, and let the world compare your strength to ours." The director whispered to an assistant, "Cut the feed, cut it." But every camera was already recording, and every second was about to go viral. The cameras were still rolling when the tension in the room thickened like smoke. Trump leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, wearing that familiar, dismissive grin he saved for moments when he thought he had already won. But Traoré didn't flinch. He stood tall, shoulders squared, eyes locked directly onto Trump's, calm, steady, unshaken. It wasn't the stare of a man intimidated by power, it was the stare of a man who knew he was the power in the room. Trump tried to regain control of the narrative. You think Africa scares me? He scoffed. I built empires. I make leaders kneel. I make nations listen. Traoré didn't even blink. You built nothing, he said quietly, but the microphone picked up every syllable. And the only ones kneeling are the ones you've crushed with debt, threats, and lies. A few journalists shifted in their seats. One lowered his camera slightly. Not because he wanted to stop filming, but because he suddenly felt like he was intruding on something historic. Trump gestured sharply. Don't lecture me. I know how the world works. Traoré stepped closer. No, he replied. You only know how the West used to work. But the world has changed. Africa has changed. And that scares you more than you admit. Trump's jaw tightened. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with the anger that comes from losing control. You think you can embarrass me? He snapped. Traoré smiled, slow and cold. I didn't embarrass you, he said. Your own words did. A murmur rippled across the room. Trump pointed to the cameras. Turn them off. But the crew didn't move. Traoré spoke again, voice firm, cutting through the air like a blade. You mocked Africa. On camera. Now the world will watch how your arrogance ends. And for the first time, Trump looked away. Trump leaned forward, his palms slamming against the polished table, the cameras catching every tremor of anger running through his jaw. You think one speech makes you powerful? He snarled. I built empires. I crushed opponents. I shaped the world while you were still learning how to salute. The room fell into a tense hush. U.S. officials exchanged uneasy glances, even they weren't used to seeing him this rattled. But Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He let Trump's fury wash over him like heat on armor, irrelevant, powerless. Then Traoré spoke, slowly, deliberately, like a general reading out a surrender that hadn't been accepted yet. You built empires, he repeated, with African gold, African hands, African suffering. You shaped nothing. You stole everything. Trump's nostrils flared, but Traoré didn't stop. And crushing opponents? Traoré leaned in. You couldn't even crush poverty in your own country. You couldn't crush racism. You couldn't crush corruption. But you want to crush Africa? He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that made even the lights seem to flicker. Trump's face turned a deeper shade of red. You mock Africa so easily on television, Traoré continued, but in this room? Face to face? You're sweating. The camera zoomed in, Trump's hand, once clenched in dominance, now trembled just enough for millions to see. And Traoré finished him off. You didn't shape the world, Mr. Trump. The world let you pretend. But you stand before a generation you can't intimidate. And Africa? He tapped the table once, hard. Africa is done being your prop. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Trump didn't have a comeback, just a glare, and the unmistakable realization that he'd walked into a battlefield with the wrong opponent. The room fell into a thick, electric silence after Traoré's challenge. Cameras zoomed in, advisors froze mid-breath, and Trump's expression twitched. Somewhere between offended and unsure. No one dared move. Traoré leaned back slightly, studying him with the calm of a man who had survived worse storms than politics, worse enemies than loud presidents. Trump finally tried to regain ground. You're acting brave because you're far from home, he said, puffing his chest. But if you were standing in the United States, you'd. Traoré cut him off without raising his voice. I have stood in war zones since I was 19, he said. Your country is the least frightening thing I've ever faced. A quiet gasp rippled through the American staff standing behind Trump. Even they knew he had walked straight into that one. Trump opened his mouth to fire back, but Traoré continued before he could. You mock Africa, Traoré said, because you think power is measured by noise. But in Africa, power is measured by what you can survive. And we have survived everything you created: colonialism, coups, mercenaries, sanctions. Yet here we still stand. He pointed at Trump's trembling glass of water. You shake, Traoré said softly, because you've never faced someone who doesn't care about your money, your army, or your flag. One of Trump's aides tried to step forward to interrupt, but Traoré's glare stopped him cold. Trump looked smaller now, not physically, but in presence. The cameras captured everything. His hesitation, his tightened jaw, the way his eyes darted as if searching for an escape line that never came. Then Traoré delivered the blow that would go viral worldwide. "You laugh at Africa," he said, "but every time you speak our name, you reveal your fear. If Africa were truly weak, you wouldn't talk about us at all." The room erupted, not with applause, but with stunned whispers. Even the journalists stared in disbelief. Trump lowered his eyes for the first time. And in that moment, everyone watching knew. Traoré had flipped the power in the room without ever raising his voice. The room fell into a brittle silence after Traoré's last words. Trump folded his arms, trying to mask the sting, but his twitching jaw betrayed everything. Reporters leaned forward, sensing the shift, the moment when confidence turns into panic. But Traoré wasn't finished. He stepped closer, closing the distance like a soldier advancing on an enemy who had already dropped his weapon. "Tell me something, Trump," Traoré said, his voice low, steady, unshakably calm. "If Africa is a joke to you, why do your corporations fight so desperately to stay there? Why do your generals beg for access to our minerals? Why is your economy tied to resources you don't control?" Trump blinked, taken off guard. He wasn't used to people confronting him with facts, especially not someone who refused to bow, tremble, or shrink under pressure. Because we bring order," Trump snapped, but even he didn't sound convinced. Traoré laughed. Not loudly, not mockingly, but with the kind of certainty that shatters illusions. "Order? You brought chaos. Poverty. Puppet governments. You created the problems you now use as excuses." Trump's face reddened. Cameras flashed. Advisors fidgeted behind him, whispering nervously. But Traoré pressed on. "You mocked Africa on camera," he said. "But look at you now, unable to answer a single question without hiding behind your entourage. I stand alone. You stand surrounded, and still afraid." That line hit harder than any shout. Harder than any insult. Because it was true, painfully, publicly true. Trump opened his mouth, but no words came out. Traoré delivered the final blow. "You don't fear Africa's weakness. You fear Africa's awakening." The room erupted, gasps, murmurs, cameras clicking non-stop. Trump looked away first, and everyone saw it. A moment later, Traoré turned, walked toward the exit, and left Trump frozen in place, defeated not by force, but by truth. The studio lights dimmed as the moderator tried to calm the roaring crowd, but the tension had already ignited into something uncontainable. Trump jabbed a finger toward Traoré again, his face flushed with the kind of anger that came from being publicly cornered. "You think you embarrassed me?" he barked. "Africa should be grateful we don't take back everything we gave you." Traoré didn't even flinch. He tilted his head slightly, as if analyzing a child having a tantrum. Then he stepped closer. Not threateningly, but with the steady confidence of someone who had already won. "You didn't give Africa anything," he said, his voice low and razor-sharp. "You took. You exploited. And when we rose, you panicked." The room fell so silent that even the cameras stopped zooming. Trump blinked, clearly expecting pushback but receiving none. Traoré continued, pacing slowly, not for drama, but like a general surveying a battlefield he had already secured. "You mock Africa," he said, "because our rise terrifies you. You mock our leaders because you can't control them anymore. You mock our gold, our power, our unity, because for the first time in history, Africa is not asking permission." Trump tried to speak, but Traoré raised a hand, not to silence him, but to finish the sentence Trump couldn't. "Tonight," Traoré declared, "you mocked Africa on camera. And you regret it on camera. Because the world just watched a man cling to the past, while Africa steps into the future. The auditorium exploded, half in cheers, half in stunned disbelief. Traoré just stood there, firm, unshaken, the embodiment of everything Trump feared, a leader he couldn't intimidate, a continent he couldn't control, and a future he couldn't stop. Inside the White House briefing chamber, cameras clicked like nervous insects, capturing every twitch on Trump's face. He had expected applause, obedience, maybe even fear. Instead, he got Traoré. Steady, unshaken, and terrifyingly honest. The tension between them thickened the air, even the journalists lowered their voices. They could feel it, this wasn't diplomacy. It was combat. Trump leaned forward, jabbing a finger toward Traoré as if pointing at a misbehaving child. "You stand here because we allow you to," he snarled. "Africa owes everything to us, your roads, your electricity, your stability. Without America, you'd still be in the dark." Traoré didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Didn't give Trump the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that Trump's security shifted their weight. "Then why," Traoré said slowly, "does the world look to Africa now? Why do your companies scramble for our minerals? Why does your government panic every time we choose independence?" Trump's lip curled, but Traoré wasn't done. "You mock Africa," he continued, "because you fear what happens when we rise without permission." The room froze. Trump's staff exchanged uneasy glances. Even the cameras paused, as if unsure whether they should keep filming. Traoré lifted his chin. "You think power is about noise. But power," he said, tapping his own chest, "is about roots. And Africa's roots go deeper than your empire ever did." Trump had no comeback. Just a tightening jaw. A reddening face. A desperate search for words that wouldn't come. The silence wasn't awkward, it was crushing. Traoré had taken the room, and Trump had lost it. Moments later, the silence became unbearable, broken only by the soft hum of cameras trying to refocus. Trump finally exhaled sharply, as if forcing confidence back into his voice. "You think you're strong because you shout?" Trump barked. "Strength is armies. Strength is money. Strength is power we created long before you were born." Traoré actually smiled, not kindly, not mockingly, but like a man who sees an opponent swing their final punch and miss. "Strength," he said calmly, "is standing alone in a room full of people who want you silent, and still speaking." Trump stiffened. "You're in America," he snapped. "We run this stage." Traoré took a slow step forward. "No," he said. "You built this stage. But today, the world is watching me on it." A murmur spread through the room. Trump threw a glance toward his advisors, looking for support, but none of them dared move. They didn't want to stand between the two men, not today. Not when the entire world was witnessing the shift. Traoré continued. "You claim Africa works for you. Yet every time we say no, your hands shake." Trump swallowed hard. His eyes betrayed the anger, and the fear. Traoré's voice dropped to a near whisper, but everyone heard it. "You mock Africa because you think it's small. But small things," he said, "can grow beyond your reach." Another silence. A heavier one. Trump had entered this room expecting control. Traoré walked in with truth. And truth was winning. The final blow came quietly, not as an outburst, but as a verdict. Trump straightened his back, trying to recover authority. "Let me make something clear," he said. "America doesn't take orders from Africa." Traoré clasped his hands behind his back. "And Africa does not kneel," he replied. "Not to America. Not to you." A few reporters gasped. Trump's face twitched. Traoré stepped into the spotlight, owning it completely. You wanted a world where Africa begs, he said. But you're living in a world where Africa negotiates, and wins. He gestured toward Trump. Leaders who mock us, fade. Leaders who fear us, hide. Leaders who challenge us, learn. Trump's breath hitched. Traoré ended it with a sentence that would echo across continents. You mocked Africa today, he said, but tomorrow, your children will ask you why Africa rose higher than the country that tried to bury it. The room erupted, not in applause, but in shock. Trump stood frozen, trapped between fury and humiliation. Traoré turned his back and walked out, leaving the cameras, the advisors, and Trump himself in a silence that felt like defeat. A soldier had entered the room. A storm had walked out.